Welcome to Long Live Alternative Party's podcast. Stay friends. We have another exciting guest on our podcast. He is with the Non-Extremist Party. His name is Tank Steiner. And he's going to share some interesting ideas with us today. So welcome to the podcast, Tank.
Thank you. Appreciate you having me on.
Of course. If we get started by you kindly giving us an introduction to yourself, a brief biographical sketch.
Yeah, my name's Tank Steiner. I am currently working as an adjunct instructor at Wake Tech Community College in Raleigh. I have a background in English and teaching. I also worked in the tech sector for the last 10 years as a tech writer and project manager. So I've done a lot of that kind of work. As far as myself personally, I grew up significantly below the poverty line, and through the help of several government programs and people in my life, I was able to get an education. I actually just finished up my master's degree in May of this year. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Oh, that's good stuff. So for your adjunct teaching position, you said your background is in English. Are you teaching English classes, or is there something else?
I'm actually working as a tutor, and so
Okay.
I help tutor students in writing and study skills, which most of the time for study skills, it's helping people with either non-native speakers or non-traditional students with their literacy. And so we do a lot of teaching older folks and non-natives to read English.
Wow. That's a noble endeavor. So that's good. Awesome. So you said you recently got your master's. Did you do a thesis for your master's project, or was there some other type of capstone experience?
I went to North Carolina State, and so they use a capstone.
Okay.
But I wrote mine on trans and posthumanism in The Good Place and Upload.
I'm sorry, you wrote it on, you said trans and what?
Posthumanism.
Humanism.
Yeah, it's the idea of the connection between humans and our evolution, and how there's a belief around the idea that our next evolutionary step is going to be technological instead of natural and mutational based.
Oh.
So if you look at something like Neuralink that Elon Musk's doing, where they're implanting a chip into someone's brain so that they're able to interact directly with the computer, that's the first, to me, one of the first direct chains in the link towards posthumanism, which is when
Okay.
humans develop beyond what we are now through the use of technology.
Huh, interesting. I've never heard of the term posthumanism before. I'm very familiar with humanism, of course, so that's a new term, so wow, that's good. Good stuff. So Tank, please tell us what caused you... Oh, also I want to ask you is, you touched on this, and this interesting thing. You said that government programs help you get where you're at. So I trust that has impacted your political views and how you approach politics, because you probably would be in favor of government programs if they help you, right?
Absolutely. I spent several years. I had a daughter right after my first semester in college, in 2003, and I was not in any position to have a child, and so I worked a lot of labor jobs, a lot of minimum wage jobs to make ends meet. And it wasn't until I moved to North Carolina and started teaching as a substitute teacher that I realized how much I enjoyed academics.
Okay.
And when it came time for me to go back, I just don't have a support system like a lot of folks luckily do. And in order for me to be able to afford to do 4 years of college, I was working full time. But I was also receiving cash assistance and food stamps, or SNAP program, they call it now, and workforce things. I had 2 cars bought for me to help get back and forth for the first couple of years that I was in college. And so just things that I never would have been able to have the support system to do on my own, I was able to take those steps because of government programs that currently exist.
Oh, great. Good. I'm glad it worked out for you. So what led you...
Thank God.
Yeah, yeah. So what led you to start this non-extremist party, and also what's it all about?
So when I had originally come up with the idea for the non-extremist party, it was trying to find a middle ground.
Okay.
Mind you, I'm pretty left. I'd probably fall into the category of socialist if I had to pick one. And so I do tend to lean more into that side of things. But I recognize that there is something to everyone's point of view, and the ideas behind it, and they all have value. The problem is when we take things to an extreme where it's almost impossible to compromise if you're coming from both ends. From the far right and the far left, there's too much middle, and no one will ever be happy. Whereas if we can start having conversations that are focused on facts and reality, there's a chance that we can come up with some solutions that make everyone maybe not happy, but at least everyone able to succeed.
Okay. That sounds good. So when did this page start? Is it a newer thing, or have you had it for a few years?
So I had actually started it during the right after Trump was elected the first time.
Oh my.
Because I kind of saw that divide there and was hoping to come to the middle. I've actually realigned slightly since then because the problem of extremes to me has changed. Where in my head at the time when the first election occurred, we had this idea there was a minority on these extremes, but as we can see from the last election, where Trump won the popular vote, it seems that those extremes aren't a minority as much as I had originally thought.
Oh wow.
And so now I tend to think that we need to focus more on education because it's almost like we don't all live in the same reality anymore.
Oh yeah,
Where
wow.
it's the facts aren't facts, they're opinions. Who you trust, and it seems to be more important than whether something can be proven or not. There's just a lot of things that have kind of changed about the way we as people deal with the world around us and interact with it. And I've kind of gotten to the point where we need to find a way to get everyone on the same page as far as how do we interpret reality? What's real? What's not? And because it's really hard to have a conversation and to have any kind of nuance when you have people who are denying things that are, scientifically accepted as a truth, or are largely accepted as a truth based on history or the things that have happened. And so,
Yes. Some people would say that we determine our truth based on what benefits us personally. Like some would say, if you're winning an election, then the election is fair, but if you're losing an election, it's not fair. So how do we deal with such mindsets?
So that one's a rough one because I've, like I said, I do tend to fall on the left side, and I've voted Democrat most of the elections in my life. And I think that one of the things that was kind of killing me after the 2020 election was the amount of election denying that was going on,
Yes.
that it was stolen, this wasn't a real thing. And I, coming down on the left side of things, I want to have faith in our election process because there hasn't been any proven widespread fraud. There hasn't been anything that has been able to be shown to me by sources that are trustworthy enough where I think that the idea that the election was stolen is something I can even think is possible, let alone probable. And then with this election, we're kind of starting to see the shift go to the other side where I spend a little too much time on X and it makes me sad, I won't lie. But we're seeing a lot more people on the left side that are questioning the results of this election.
Huh.
And if we can't even have faith in that that the central aspect of how our government works, like by the voice of our people, it just becomes like an impossibility, I think, once you do anything else. And so rebuilding the faith in that process, I think, is critical.
Okay, that sounds good. So what particular policies do you recommend or do you not recommend policies? There are some political parties that de-emphasize policies and they have general principles or election reforms that they advance. So what's the approach in regard to policy for the non-extremist party? Do you think there's certain positions that are non-extremist, or is it a matter of a methodology for approaching policy?
So I think the methodology is to me, the more important piece, or the most important piece. We have, like I said, such a divided country. However, there are so many things that I think are central and could be so important to protecting our democracy and moving it forward, that people on both sides do agree on.
Okay.
I think the number one thing that everyone can kind of see, or up until this election with Musk's involvement and everything, what seemed to be true to everyone I talked to was that getting money out of politics is central. Like, if we can do that, we're going to save a lot. Like, because I don't see us as them being a left versus right. I see us as them far more as a rich versus poor. And that gap in that class system is becoming worse than it's almost ever been. But certainly in our country, I don't want to say historically worse than it's ever been, but it's definitely getting to the point where we have such a gap between those who are surviving and wealthy and those who are not. That it's impossible to see eye to eye on a lot of things, and so much of the money that's in politics and so much of the money that's used to weigh things and make decisions is coming from the ultra wealthy. And you can see that in like every reform, every bill that has pieces that are benefiting those groups. And so I think that if my strategy, the thing that I think would be the most effective, would be to come up with a party who is picking their people to elect based on a set of promises. I personally think that removing social issues, like spending 4 to 8 years and making it so that, if we can get a big enough group and a big enough movement and to try to change some of these things, where we can come up with a set of, these are the things we think are important. This is how we reform our country. It could be getting rid of the Electoral College. It could be, cutting back money, getting rid of Citizens United, getting rid of elements of the Patriot Act that allows spying on citizenry. These things that like both sides seem to be really strongly in favor of. And using those as a way to change the face of our political entities, where we don't elect people based on who's richest and who has the most financial support, but who has the best ideas that are the most agreed upon in general. And so that's kind of where I'm at, is if we could find, get enough people in enough places throughout our country to agree, like, hey, there's still things that might need to be done socially. There are still things that might need to be done ethically. But if we can get to the point where we can trust in our government, that's going to be a key component. And so let's work exclusively on changing those things and getting our government to function in a moral and ethical way, without the burden of all the money coming in, and all the weight and all the power and authority that comes from that, that we can hopefully move forward and then make the rest of those choices based not on left or right, but on, the reality of the world we live in.
Oh, sure. So I heard you say something interesting I haven't heard before on this podcast. I heard you mention the Patriot Act as repealing part of that would help with campaign finance. Could you please explain how that would work?
I'm sorry, that was a separate thing. Personally, it's not something, I'm not a big fan of the government spy on individuals and the lack of transparency that's involved in that. So to me, that's just a separate thing that I think there's a lot of agreement around. I don't necessarily know that would help with kind of campaign finance reform. So unless we were to point those all that spying on the people who are benefiting from it. And I'm sure that we could come up with some campaign refinance based on the conversations that are happening.
Oh, yeah.
But
Yeah,
that's
that's a
pretty
good point.
unethical in its own way. So.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's a big point. A lot of people have expressed concern about the Patriot Act and spying because of it. So, yeah, that's interesting. So in order to make these changes, do you think we should have public funding of campaigns so that everyone who's eligible to run can get some funding like some people propose? Or do you think it would be better to not have any funding and everyone be on their own? So how do you see the way to equalize the system? What would be the ideal that we're working toward?
So I think the technology allows for a lot more people to get their voices out there than ever before.
Sure.
I think that limiting the funding that's available, using more public resources, maybe not in terms of paying to do more commercials or doing more marketing, but giving access to folks so that maybe making, for example, like we have NPR and PBS, like those might be places we can start letting political things be explored further so that they don't require sponsorships and funding and billions of dollars to reach an audience. Using resources like YouTube or Vimeo, places you can put up your videos and get followers, and trying to do things more naturally that way, as opposed to you can pay the most and get your face in front of the most people and scream the loudest to get the most attention. I feel like that if you did something like that, that even the field where, you know, you couldn't do large donations towards politicians, or if you did, they had to be very transparent about where that money's coming from and what the benefits they're seeking by spending that money. It's going to help us kind of keep an eye on that and reform the way that we look at, you know, there just seems to be such a direct connection between where your funding comes from and the way that you, where funding comes from and the way that politicians legislate. And I would like there to be more of a disconnect there, where it's not just, oh, who paid me the most, because that's going to affect how I vote. It's what's the most beneficial to my constituents.
Oh yeah, yeah, that's a trick. That's a trick. That's one of the big concerns we have about our system is the way it's. A lot of people call it legalized bribery.
Yeah. Well, and it's one of the things why I think that Citizens United is such a devastating thing, by making corporations so that they can donate billions. Like, what other possible effect could they have than trying to benefit that company? Like, why else would they be donating that amount of money?
Oh, good point.
And so you're allowing organizations that are built around capitalist ideals to directly affect the way that we are running our country and the way that we are supporting our people or not supporting our people, as the case may be. And so.
Okay, sounds good. That sounds good. So, do you think that the way we vote is a factor too, in addition to the changing of the campaign finance laws? Like, a lot of people in this podcast talk about ranked choice voting or approval voting. Do you think that changing that would be impactful?
I think that ranked choice voting would be a big thing. To me, getting rid of the electoral college, I don't like the idea that large swaths of land have more voting rights than huge numbers of people. That doesn't make sense anymore. It did at one point, but I just don't see the value of it now. And so I think that both of those things could definitely play a factor in how we do things. I think the biggest thing that we could do is eliminate all the legislation and unwritten rules that make it so that we're a two-party system.
Oh, wow.
Because currently, right now, a third party isn't possible unless you convince enough of the main two parties to change or to vote against those parties. And someone's been a lifelong Republican or a lifelong Democrat, having something that's new and different enough where it's not just going to, determine who a loser is in an election, but might actually give you a winner, would take such a large movement. That's why I think it's critical for any third party that wants to succeed to have a basis that is agreeable to pretty much everybody. if you don't get it so that you're going to have as many Republicans who are interested as you do Democrats or even independents, then you're never going to be able to get a third party in just because of the rules and laws that are built in now that pretty much make it impossible for a third party to even get on the stage to be
Okay.
heard.
Sure.
And
Yeah.
so
Exactly.
like getting rid of those and those rules, I think, would play just as significant a part as looking at how we elect.
Okay. So how do we get rid of those rules? Are we going to do this through ballot initiatives? Are we going to do this by changing laws, constitutional amendments? What do you think is the best strategy?
I think that starting locally, doing what you can on a small scale,
Okay.
getting people in and building the movement is the key. You have to do something to get the momentum and get the support, but once it's in place, it's going to take all of that. It's going to take looking at the small changes that can be enacted individually, but it's also going to take changing the legislation or the processes that we currently have and the legislation that we currently have, and eventually, hopefully, leading to some changes in how we do everything in terms of finance and campaigns and elections.
Oh wow. Yeah, that would be good. So, yeah, locally is a good place to start. So, a lot of people recommend that. So it sounds like a sound strategy. So that's good. So that would be a good idea. Now, what do you think? What type of candidates? You touched on this before. What type of candidates do you think would be good to run for office?
I would like, so I am not a person who thinks that we should get rid of like politicians because they know their business. I know that I've worked in a few different roles, and knowing how much goes into understanding how those roles work and my place in them. To me, it's insane that we keep electing celebrities, and
Oh,
people because they're not politicians. It doesn't make sense to me that we want to have people running the government that have never been involved in the government and have no idea how it functions currently, let alone how it should function. And so I think, to me, the best people to be elected are educated people who have had maybe public service, uh, like undergrad or master's programs, people who have trained or learned on their own to learn these things. I don't want it to be, I'm not saying they should be academics necessarily. It's just people who have educated themselves and who understand what the real function of government is. Because we can say what it should be all day, but we need to understand how it functions now in order to think about how to change it in a way that's not going to break systems and ruin things for people. Like
okay.
currently with RFK being elected into, or not elected, but being nominated into the position he is in the government, or RFK Jr., sorry. That's a terrifying thing for so many people. Like my wife is currently seeking disability, and we've been struggling with that process for over a year to get her help because she has rheumatoid arthritis and like can't work.
Oh,
And we're electing a person into the position that runs all of that who's just about cutting programs and isn't about facts, who's an anti-vaxxer. Like all of that to me is insane. That we're allowing that to happen or that we might allow that to happen and that people voted for Trump based on him doing that. The fact
yeah.
that people voted for Trump because he's a good businessman, like that doesn't mean he's a good politician. In fact,
True.
if you look historically, that's exactly the opposite of what we got the first time. And so it's just been, getting people that actually know the job and know the law, I think is important. So.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds like a good start. So yes. So yeah, those are some good ideas that can make a change, and you sound like you're optimistic that it's certainly a difficult thing, yet progress can be made.
Yeah, I do. I think that enough people are tired of how things have been and how things are going, and enough people are frightened of where things are going. That if there is ever going to be a change, and that doesn't involve violence, because I don't think any big change should. That now's a good time to implement it because there are enough people that are recognizing the issues that are there and looking for answers that can get us to somewhere safer and better for everyone, that we might be able to come together and do something big. But my biggest fear is that we're going to wait too long. We're not going to be able to find a shared reality to make these changes, and the changes that are going to come are still going to come, but they're going to come from the worst of us instead of the best of us. So.
Okay. That sounds good. So Tank, how can our audience support you in your efforts?
Learn, pay attention, learn about rhetoric, learn how to understand sources that are good versus sources that are not. Don't choose one individual person to be the source of truth for you. Try to understand that it's all about the who's come before and what's going on, not just for one group of people, but for everyone. Listen to other people. And when I say listen, I don't mean wait for your turn to speak, but actually listen and try to understand what people's fears are and what people's concerns are and what people's hopes are. And base your opinion of those people on what they're telling you they believe instead of assuming you know what they believe based on what someone else has told you.
All right. Yeah, that's good. That's good. So Tank, we thank you for coming on the podcast today and sharing your views and your perspective.
No, I appreciate you having me. I'm glad. Thanks.
We wish you all the best with your academic career and everything else you do in your personal and professional life.
You too.
Bye now.
All right, bye.